Hi everyone, I have got an old video for you that I'm putting out there. This was recorded a little while ago, all about your alcohol pens. So if you've ever struggled with alcohol pen blending and you're colouring, maybe which ink to stamp with, this is the perfect video for you. I've got all my top tips and mistakes that you may have been making in the past. Like I say, it is an older video, so please excuse the quality and the sound, but I think it's well worth putting it back out there for those of you who didn't catch it the first time round. Let me know in the comments if you've got any other suggestions for your alcohol ink blending and colouring, and also if you've got any questions, I'd love to hear them. I'll answer you as soon as possible.
Alcohol ink colouring is a fantastic technique that looks absolutely beautiful when it's done, but I know a few people have purchased some alcohol pens at quite a cost, quite a budget from their crafting stash, and once they've received them, not really known how best to use them, not always ended up with the most professional results, and in the end storing them away and not using them. You definitely want to get them out and have a play again, and hopefully this video with the tips for what you may be doing right and wrong will help you to get those professional results that you hoped for in the beginning. So the first thing we're going to look at is the material that you're actually drawing or colouring onto, because this is really important. It's going to affect the overall look of your finished coloured piece. Now, whether you're stamping onto that first, and of course if you are stamping your outline of your image first, you're going to want a smooth cardstock anyway, or paper, but whether you're stamping, whether you're just colouring freehand, for example, maybe doing sort of brush lettering type style, you're going to want your ink to stay where you put it and not to bleed out as such. So what I've got here is I've got a copy paper. Now this one is just one that I've taken out of my printer. It's very inexpensive, it's very thin, and also because of that the fibres are not very tightly woven together. It's just how it's made. This is a specific marker paper, so for markers, for colouring, for applying a lot of ink and a lot of moisture to the paper. So what I'm going to do is just do a little bit of colouring onto this one first of all to show you. Now I've used the chisel nib with this pen, just making sure I've got full coverage on here first of all. Now you may or may not be able to see that gradually that is already starting to get fuzzy edges, blurry edges, but look at this underneath. It's gone all the way through my paper onto the underneath of there, and I'll have to find something to clean that up in a little while. But that is just basically the ink is spreading, being absorbed into the paper all the way through, and where it's absorbed through to the back, it's going to continue to be absorbed outwards as well, and that's what's going to start giving us the fuzzy edges that we start to see there, but that will continue until that ink is dry. So maybe for the next sort of 5 minutes, really, that's going to continue to bleed out, and you're just going to get this really fuzzy, blurry edge. So let's just switch up and do this on marker paper. So let's find the chisel nib and the same ink again, and let's go over this, similar sort of patch, and then go over again, just for fairness, because I went over 2 layers in the first one. So let's take a look underneath. So we've started to go through, but nowhere near as much. Now you can expect the colours come through, that's not normal, that's natural. If you're working in a colouring book, the colour will still go through, and very often good colouring books will only have an image printed on one side for this reason, but it's not gone through. The paper is holding on to that ink. Now looking at the edges though, they're nice and crisp. They're still, you can perfectly see. Now if I bring in for a comparison this one, you can see how blurred those edges have started to get already, and you can see actually quite clearly there the nice sharp edge here, much blurrier edge there. So that's why you want to choose your paper carefully. It's well worth spending money on your paper. You're better off going for maybe a few less colours of pen to start with to get the correct paper to work on. Always look for marker paper. You want the paper to be smooth, because otherwise you're going to rough up the nibs of your pens. So these are made of fibres, and if you're going over a textured paper, even something as textured as a copy paper, there's a very slight grain to this, you're going to be damaging the nib of your pen and fraying it. It's almost like colouring on sandpaper, on a very fine grit sandpaper. So you do want a particular paper, and you want that to be lovely and smooth too. So then if you are a paper crafter and you intend on stamping an image onto your paper and then using your alcohol pens, which is something we very often do, the best ink to go for, in my personal opinion, I love Memento inks, and they are water-based. You want a water-based ink, and this clearly says on the back here that this is water-based. Now, if you don't go for a water-based ink and there's some alcohol content in your ink, the alcohol in the pens is going to react with the alcohol of your outline, and it's just going to fuzz and blur your outline. You may have seen that before, even if you're colouring in an image in a colouring book. If it's not a good quality one and they've accidentally put some sort of solvent in the ink that they've printed the colouring book with, then your alcohol pens are going to just react with that outline and blur it, and you don't get a nice clear image. So stamping with something like Memento, ensure your ink, whichever you choose, is water-based. So let's just show you how this looks when we start to colour. So I'm going to do a black outline, but it's a good idea if you love the sort of the more natural look to your stamped images. You can go with a grey or a light brown, a much lighter neutral colour, and Memento comes in lots of different colours. Let's just stamp this. I'd usually prefer to use a stamping block, a stamping platform rather. But we can see there we've got a nice clear image. And let's just colour in with quite a lot of ink one of these outlines on our specific marker paper, and we should get a lovely clear image. There, so I've just coloured that petal in. I've loaded up with lots and lots of ink there from my pens without letting any of the layers dry in between, which is a tip I will come to in a little while, and that has kept that outline lovely and clear and sharp. So next let's talk about your blenders. So blenders are usually a clear ink, alcohol ink pen, and unfortunately they are named completely inappropriately because they don't actually blend much at all. So with the blender, as you see, there'll be usually a white pen to stand out, so the barrels will often be a different colour to everything else. So I've got a couple here that are white, so they'll say colourless or they'll say colourless blender, but please don't be fooled by this. Let me show you what happens when you try to blend two of these. Let's go for this petal at the side here. So I'm going to start with my light colour at one end of the petal, and I'll just colour in this petal quite roughly. I may go over the edges a little bit, but that's not an issue. Okay, so but I'm going to go over all of this petal here. I'm going to come in with a darker colour. Let's not even go for the darkest colour. Let's go for something that's just a couple of shades lighter, or sorry, darker. And let's start to flick that into the colour, and then think, right, okay, so I've got a blender, so surely this is going to help me. I can come in with my blender, let's use the smaller tip, and I can blend these two together. So you start working between the two like this and going along. You think, oh, hang on a minute, the line's blurring a little, but it's getting lighter, it's removing the ink. Maybe you can just about see here we've still got the peachy colour at the end, then it goes to white almost, and then it goes into the pink. That's not actually blended anything at all that's done is lifted the colour out. So the blending pens are not actually for blending. What they do is they remove or almost bleach out the colour from your paper, which is a fantastic tool, and we can certainly use those, and I'll move on to that in just a moment. But the best way to blend is simply to use the lighter shade of your section to blend with. So start with the darker. So let's start with this one, and I'll talk about in a moment about how to choose colours that do work together. So just a small area. You don't need a huge amount for shading because you're going to be blending it out. You're going to be lifting it and moving it a little bit. I'm coming to my mid-tone here, and I'm going to go over the dark again and come up a bit further with this one. So I can still see I've got my dark colour right in the middle. Little flicks. And of course the ink always looks a little bit darker when you first put it down because the alcohol content is actually wetting the paper. Then I'm going to come with my lightest shade, And again, I'm going to go over the entire colour that I've just put down all the way up to the top. So first of all, a base layer. Just start to reactivate that alcohol ink that's been put down. And you can do this even if your layers have dried. And then I'm just going to start adding more along the border there. Little flicks again. Just start letting it work its magic. You don't need to use pressure here. You can just let it do it all by itself. It's going to blend that colour in for you. Now leave that for a few minutes. That looks quite dark compared to this bottom one here, for example, but the alcohol, you can already see it happening. The alcohol just burns, but evaporates, and it leaves you with the beautiful colour behind. And you can already see how that is a much better blend than something like this. Now, talking about that blending pen though, if you do make a mistake, so let's just accidentally, let's do it with the lighter one. We're going around the edge of a petal and we accidentally, there we go. We've just gone off over the edge there. Okay, this is where your blending pen absolutely comes into itself, because as we saw, it lifts colour, it erases colour almost. You may need to do this a couple of times, but just go over, allow that to start sinking into the paper and working, and then you can work that in a little bit more. Not right up to the edge though, because again this is going to seep through the paper ever so slightly. There we go. So lift that up. Just keep working at it until you cannot see that colour any longer. And when you can't see that colour anymore, you do have a wet patch there. The alcohol there sitting in the paper is going to lift off. You can dry that with something like a heat tool if you have one. You can dry that off, but allow it to air dry, and that will come back to bright white with that pink just all gone. Other mistakes that are often made when people are using alcohol pens is actually laying down the colour. Now I've already discussed a little bit about the alcohol, the wetness that's in the ink evaporating and leaving the colour behind. Because of this, you can't actually over colour an area and make it too dark. Whichever colour this alcohol ink intends on being in the end, that's as dark as you can possibly make it. Unlike with things like watercolours where you can go over and over. Now, if I just colour in an area like this, you notice that's actually quite streaky. Even if I leave that to dry, that will still be streaky, and that just means that I haven't fully saturated this area completely. This is going to happen on any cardstock. It's irrelevant of the material that you're putting down. So all you want to do is give that a few seconds to dry, and you can go back over. Now I'm going to go back over reasonably heavily, making sure I'm overlapping my lines as well, all the way over, and you see you've got a much more solid colour there. But what's happened is where the darker areas were, and I've gone and applied more ink, you're not going to be making those lines even darker. Don't worry about that. It just means that you hadn't fully saturated the area. Once the area is fully saturated with colour, it's not going to deepen and darken. So you can go over and make sure your full image or your full area has solid colour on it, even if you have to do a couple of layers, and not worry about getting it too dark. So don't leave it streaky, go back over again. Now, in addition to that, something that a lot of people will still do is maybe let's get a couple of colours here. So let's start layering some colours in the way I've showed you. You can start with your dark and then layer up. Is fine, but I'm going to just show you this for example's sake. So I'm going to put down a base layer. This is CR1, and again I'll explain to you about these in a moment. So making sure there's no streaks, a nice solid layer of colour, and then I think, right, I want some shading, so I'm going to go in with some dark along this edge here, bring that in darker. Then I'm going to go in with a mid-tone, and I'm going to blend it out because I didn't think about it first, and do the dark and keep piling this up. Now, you may notice I've started to get a blurry, fuzzy edge here, but this one's nice and smooth because I haven't put too much ink down here. Even on your marker paper, even the best paper can still only manage a certain amount of fluid or medium at a time. That really is starting to fuzz out now because we've just piled on too much ink at once. So definitely leave your layers to dry between each one. So let's try that. So we started with our lightest one, which was CR1. So let's just go here and let's do it beside. So a patch of light. I'm going to give that a few moments to dry. Now that's had enough time for the majority of the alcohol to burn off. I'm now going to add my next layer of colour. And I'm going to repeat that process. You don't have to actually sit and wait and tap your fingers while you are waiting for this to dry here. You can move on to another area of your colouring. So add down your base layer, your first layer, and then move on and come back to it in a few moments. So I'm just going to add another coat to this. You can see I put quite a bit down there, and the fuzzing is much less there. If you've got a nice black outline, that's completely going to be concealed by that. Of course, I've only left that so that's sort of half dry between layers for the sake of the video. Leave it completely dry, you won't have this blurry wicking effect even on the best paper. Lastly, just looking at our pens, how do we choose the best colours to blend together? So most pens will have a system as such. Now I've just got in here Spectrum Noir pens, that brand. I've got another whole basket full of Chameleon brand pens and lots of others scattered around as well. They all have a system for their colours and their shades. So if you notice on here, we've got, for example, we've got BG3. So the B and the G are the colours that make up this colour. So I'd imagine this will be blue and grey, and then 3 is really the shade. So we've also got here so DR2, CR3, TB4, and they're all a mixture of different colours that make up that particular pen and then the shade that is as well. So if you really want colours that blend nicely together, go for something as I have. Stick with the same letters. So CR, CR, CR. I've got 1, 4 and 6. So these are the tones that I was using for my flower that I was colouring in, because I know that these 3 will work really nicely. I've also got here CR5 too and CR3. So they will all work together beautifully. Now if you want to mix a couple of completely different colours for some reason, make sure that one of the letters within each of your pens matches one of the letters on the other pen that you're going to be using. And if you can match the numbers, then that's just a bonus. It will blend much nicer together. So for example, I've got TB7 and GT3. Although they're not a perfect match, they're going to a point work quite nicely together because I've got a T within each of them. Now, if I was to take TB, I don't know if I've got one here, but a darker or a lighter TB and a darker GT and add those in. So I've got, oh, here we go, I've got TB4. So I could mix that in with my blend and I could find a GT that's a little bit darker somewhere in there as well and use those within my blend. And they're all going to help everything match up nicely. So have a look and work out your system. Each brand will come with their own system and they will explain that on their website or on your packet of pens. But it's well worth getting to know it so you really understand how the blending pens work together to help you get the best results.
So hopefully that's helped some of you. So thank you for joining me today. Don't forget on my channel I've got lots of other top tip, hack and trick videos. So check that out. Make sure you're a subscriber and hopefully I'll see you again very soon. Take care and happy crafting.